stop where you can have a moment to talk with your partners about the comprehension questions on your page. So while listening, try to answer the question, and during our short breaks, we're going to try to answer with our partners, okay? So, let's get started. So, this is a quote from the American Declaration of Independence. So what this was is the first document that America ever wrote as a country. Okay, the first thing America wrote as a country. And this is the second line of that document, of that writing. So a lot of the language is difficult, but the thing we need to focus on is that in this document, they said that all men are created equal, that everyone is equal together, right? With certain rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's kind of the main idea of why America was built. The main goal is that everybody can live their life, that everyone can be free, and that everybody can do what makes them happy, right? That was our main goal. So the first thing I want you all to think about is, what is slavery? Do you know this word, slavery? Does everybody know? Maybe? Go ahead and talk with your partner for maybe 30 seconds. What is your idea of what slavery is? Do you have any idea? So the definition of slavery, it's a system where people are considered property, where people can be bought, where people can be sold, okay? So slavery is any time people can be bought and sold and they have no freedom to choose, right? So that's what slavery is. In America, it lasted from 1619, before the country started, to 1850. So in American history, that is 241 years. That is almost as long as the United States has been a country. Okay? So it's a long history, and maybe so tied in, so connected to American history, okay? So when slavery was at its highest point, there were 4 million slaves in America. That was 13% of the whole population were enslaved, okay? So what was the situation of slaves in America? So some of the issues in America is, first, slavery was generational. So what that means is that if your parents were slaves, then you become a slave when you are born, okay? You don't do anything to become a slave. You have no choice. When you are born, you are a slave in slavery. Second, it was common in America that maybe the mother and the child are sold to different people. Maybe the mother is sold to one person and the daughter is sold to somebody else. So that's obviously very bad, very awful. Also, slaves could be physically punished, right? Physical punishments. So they were whipped, they were beaten if they didn't do their job well, or if they had any problem with with their owner, right? Also, it was against the law to educate slaves, to teach them how to read, to teach them how to, what their history was. This was all against the law. They also had poorly made houses that they lived in, called shacks. So these are very small, very poorly made buildings. And even if you could become free, even if you got your freedom, you were forced to leave your state forever. You could not come back. Often, one person in a family became free and had to leave without their family because they were forced to leave their state and their family were still slaves. So why? Why, if this was so bad, and in America, our goal was that everyone was equal, why did we have this system, right? It doesn't make any sense. Well, the main reason was money, right? Slavery created the United States' #1 export, what we sent to other countries, which was cotton. America created 2/3 of the whole world's cotton in the 1800s. It was 50% of what we sent to other countries. And of the 4 million, 2 million of the slaves picked cotton. So this was a big industry, and it made many people very rich. Okay, so we just learned a lot. Go ahead and look at your comprehension questions and see if you can answer them with your partners. We're going to take maybe 2 or 3 minutes. 2 or 3 minutes. So we're just answering the first 2 comprehension questions under slavery notes. Slavery notes. Okay, maybe about 30 more seconds. 30 more seconds. And then we'll go over the answers. Okay, so let's start with the first one. How long? How long did slavery exist? Who thinks they have a good answer? Does anybody have a good answer? I saw a few correct answers. Who wants to give it a try? How many years? Anybody? Cool.
241 years.
Perfect. 241 years. So for America, a very long time, right? And then, why was slavery continued in America? Why was it continued? Why did it happen? Does anybody think they have an answer? Anybody? Yumi, do you have an answer? Right, because it made a lot of money. Okay? This was such a large part of the U.S. economy. So much of America's money was made with slaves. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next section. This section is about the Civil War and after. So, the U.S. Civil War. This was a conflict, a war, between the Northern Union and the Southern Confederacy. In the South is where most of the slavery was. This is where most of the slaves were. So the war lasted for 4 years, from 1861 to 1865. It was started by the South because they thought the North was going to eliminate or get rid of slavery for the whole country. So the war, this big war, was all about slavery and whether we should keep it or get rid of it. At the end of the war, the Union won and slavery was ended in America. So by the end of the war, slavery was ended in the United States. So what happened after the war? Did everything suddenly, very quickly, become good for Black Americans? No, it did not become suddenly good. So after the war, an organization was created called the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan. So the KKK is an American terrorist group that fights for white supremacy. So white supremacy is the idea that white people are the best people in the world, that they are better than all other people, is the idea of white supremacy, and what the KKK fights for, okay? Many of the members were Southern soldiers, the Confederacy, right? So after the war, after they lost, they started this group. This group did its best to kill Black people and make their lives worse. So in one state in America, in 1865, they killed 2,000 Black families, 2,000 Black people. This is in 1 year in one state. Their goal was to attack Black Americans who were ambitious, who were trying to get more education, who were trying to get more money, who were trying to make a good life for themselves. That is who the Ku Klux Klan targeted or attacked. These people are still in America today. They still exist in America today. They still are active in America today. And it's not illegal in America to be in the Ku Klux Klan. So, still a big problem. Okay. So I want to talk about systematic racism. So what is systematic racism? That is racism that is a part of everyday life and part of the organizations of a country. So this is the government is racist. The people are racist. And it's not always very clear that something is directly racist, but it's just part of the system, part of the organization. So, after the war, after the Civil War, most black people had to become what is called a sharecropper. A sharecropper is when you live and work on land that you do not own. This is somebody else's farm. This is somebody else's land. Because you can't buy land, because you have no money, right? So you work on somebody else's land, a white person's land, and they get 1/2 of everything you grow. They get 1/2 of everything you grow. And then they get to pay however much they want for the second half. Then there was also the black codes, and this one's very important. The black codes forced black people to be sharecroppers. And if they didn't, they go to jail. This also told black people where they could and could not go. Maybe you can't go into town by yourself. You have to go with your boss, your white boss. So what does this sound like to you? Maybe it sounds a lot like slavery still, right? Sounds a lot like slavery. So after the war, this system was created in the South. Black people have to be sharecroppers. And if they don't, they go to jail. This is how the South continued slavery without calling it slavery, okay? And then there was also voter suppression. So what that means, voter suppression, means that they had ways of stopping black people from voting. So they made it as difficult as they could to stop black people from voting. They did this with reading tests or literacy tests. If you remember, it was illegal to educate a slave. And so they had literacy tests or reading tests to stop them from voting. And then also poll taxes. This is money you pay to be allowed to vote. But since they were just slaves, they had no money, so they could not vote. This was all a way to stop black people from getting more rights, from getting more money, from getting ahead, right? Okay, and then we're going to talk briefly about white violence. Okay, so there are many situations in America in our history where white people have attacked and destroyed entire communities in America. So one example is the Tuzla Race Massacre. This destroyed a wealthy black community. So a place where everyone had money and everyone had good jobs. They destroyed it by dropping bombs from airplanes on these people. And they killed 300 people in this community. Another example in my own home state is the Wilmington Massacre. They destroyed a middle-class black community, and they used machine guns, or guns that shoot very fast. And they killed 100 people in Wilmington. Okay, so we're gonna take another break. So now we have our post-Civil War section, okay? We've got 2 comprehension questions. Please take a moment to review those questions and try to answer them.
Systematic racism だったけども、systematic racism っていうのは、組織的な差別ってことだよね。だから 結局今の話だと奴隷制度は、シビルウォーの後になくなったけども結局 KKK みたいなそういう、ね、ものがいたり、国としてやっぱり根強く残ってたこのシステマティック・レイシズムっていうのはもう国に根付いたもう国が容認してるからいかないけども国がそうだなっていうその国になんていうの染みついているその考え方、要は人種差別っていうことになります。
And I've changed the slide back to the early systematic racism slide, in case you want to.
Wait a second.
Okay, maybe one more minute. Okay, let's go ahead and bring it back. So let's start with the first question. What is the KKK? What is the KKK? Does anybody have an answer? What is the KKK? What did they do? Please.
It's an acronym of Ku Klux Klan, and which is a terrorist community that thinks white people are the best.
Exactly. So they are a terrorist group. They do violence because they think white people are the best. It's a good answer. So the second one maybe is a little difficult, so I'll explain one more time. So on the slide, it doesn't say, but they are laws. They are laws that force black people to work as sharecroppers. Okay? They are laws that force them to work as sharecroppers. Okay. 2 more sections. So, this is a statement from American history called Separate but Equal. So what this was is in later American history, people said it's against the law to treat black people and white people unequally. Unequally. They have to be equal, they said. In the South, to avoid treating black people the same, they created an idea called separate or apart, separate, but equal. So what they would do is they would always have a white version of something and then a black version of something. So for this example, you have a water fountain that white people can use and a water fountain that black people can use. And if you notice, the white one's a little bit nicer, right? Looks a little bit better. The colored one, the black one, is a little bit worse. So this was common, where there would be white schools and black schools, or white stores and black stores. And almost always, the black stores were lower quality. Okay? So it was not separate but equal, it was separate but unequal. So this time period is called the Jim Crow period. You don't have to memorize that. But here are some things that were laws during the Jim Crow time period. So 1, interracial marriage was illegal. So a black man could not marry a white woman, or a white man could not marry a black woman. This was illegal. Also, like I said, the separate things, they weren't equal. So, very bad. And then finally, also businesses could deny black people service. So if you went to a restaurant and you were a black person, they could say, "We don't serve black people, please leave." Okay. Also, jobs could tell you that you could not work here because you're black. For example, this sign, right? Help wanted, white only. So they only hire white people. So this has a lot of problems that it creates in a society. So to fight against this, we have the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement. So civil rights are just rights that every person should have in a community. Just rights that everyone should have. So there were civil rights activists who wanted to end segregation, or keeping things apart, and discrimination, which is treating people differently because of their race. So the protesters were non-violent. They didn't attack people, they didn't break things, they were non-violent. But the police and white citizens were very violent to the protesters. They would use dogs to attack protesters. They would use water hoses from the fire department, right? And shoot lots of water. By the end of the civil rights movement, 2 major leaders, MLK, who you probably know, MLK, Martin Luther King, and a man named Malcolm X, another leader, had been murdered. So these are civil rights leaders. These were 2 black men who were murdered for trying to get equal rights. So the protests resulted in several new laws that protected black Americans. This situation was in 1960. 1960, not very, very long ago. Okay, so we're going to take another break. Let's take a look at those answers and try to work on the segregation section of the comprehension notes. give you one more minute. One more minute. Okay. Let's bring it back. So, the first question. What was one of the bad things about the Jim Crow era, the Jim Crow time period? Who's got an answer? Please. Right. So black Americans could be denied their employment because of their skin color. That's a big one. That's a very big one. Okay, the next question. What was the result of the civil rights movement? What was the result? Please.
The protest resulted in several new laws which protected the rights of Black Americans.
Perfect. So right here, several new laws that protected the rights of black Americans. Okay. So, what is one of the most common ways to build money? Right? So, I'm not going to ask because it's a difficult question, but the answer is buying a house. So, by buying a house, the house's value usually increases over time. Houses are worth more money over time, and they usually increase as money value increases, right? So why is that important? So, after and during the civil rights movement, there was a process called redlining. Redlining is very important to understand for American Black history. So, what was it? It was the denial, or you could refuse, mortgages, insurance, loans. So, could you explain what those are?
First of all, can you finish explaining that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Mortgages, insurance, and loans, based on location, based on where you lived in a city, they could decide if you get mortgages, insurance, or loans.
Alright, thanks.
Okay.
例えば、これ、レッドラインって赤い線ってことなんですけども、主にはアメリカだとその黒人の住んでるエリアとか、そういう部分と差別化をする、その経済とか、この地域は、そのレッドっていうと、なんか悪い警告的なイメージがあるね。この地域はそのダメなっていうか線引きをして、そういうところにはその住居手当だったり保険だったり、貸付のローンとかそういうのは行わない。他の金融的な金融保証とか、例えば今ちょっと全然話で違うけども10万円支給のがあるじゃないですか。なんとか給付金みたいな。それがそういうレッドラインの人たちのエリアに住んでいる人たちには払われない。で、それがアメリカでいうと黒人が住んでいる場所。これ、レッドラインっていうのはすごく大事なタームなので覚えておきましょう。
Thank you very much. Okay, so what effect does that have? Why is that important? So, in America, in the 1930s, they wanted to increase wealth of people with low income, low amounts of money. So they gave loans to people to buy houses. They let people borrow money to buy houses. These were very good loans. It was easy to get the loan, and you didn't have to pay much more than you borrowed back. Okay, so low interest is what that's called. Why was it a problem? So, of the loans, of all of them, only 2% went to black families. Only 2% went to black families. So, these areas are the ones that are red, are the worst ones, right, to get a loan. These were areas where black people lived. And if black people lived in your area, it was made a red area. So you could not get loans, and then businesses would not want to open in these red areas. It was very difficult to start a new business in these red areas. This causes the property value, or how much land is worth. How much land is worth in these areas, it makes it go down. So land is worth less money in these red areas. This also had a situation where white people wanted to move out of the city into suburbs, maybe like Sakura. Maybe they wanted to move out of Kawagoe into Sakura. But black people were not allowed in these areas. So these were areas where many new houses were being built, but black people were not allowed in. They couldn't move to these areas. So this meant that in the cities, many people were black, and in the suburbs, many people were white. So it created segregation again, right? Black people live in this area, white people live in this area. So what does that cause? So one big issue that this causes is in America, you have to go to your local school. So if you lived in Sakado, you have to go to Sakado High School, okay? And your funding, the money your school has, their budget, how much they can spend, comes from local property tax. So how much money they can get from the value of people's houses, okay? So places that were redlined have a lower value for their houses, which means that they have a lower property tax, which means their schools have less money. So what that means is that schools with mostly black students are usually underfunded. They don't have enough money. And they usually have worse teachers, okay? So education levels for black communities are often lower than for white communities in America. And this is still happening today. This is still common today.
Really?
Other consequences. So, like I said, redlined areas have fewer new stores. So it's difficult to get a job in these areas. Also, they have worse public services. That means worse parks, worse libraries, and maybe worse bus systems, worse buses. Also, no new buildings are usually built in redlined areas. So the buildings are all very old and they're falling apart. Maybe they have crumbling walls, right? Here's another example from Detroit. It's very common to see these kinds of buildings in redlined areas. Okay, so let's take a moment to review redlining questions and the notes, and then we'll review the main key points. Okay, so we don't have much time left, so we're going to quickly go over the answers. So, redlining is being allowed to refuse or not give mortgages, insurance, and loans based on location, based on where you live. Okay? Give you 1 second on that. Okay. And this definition is also on your main idea page at the bottom. And then number 2, what are 2 ways that it's harmful for black communities? So 1, it creates a lower level of education. It creates a lower level of education. It also creates fewer stores where black people live, and worse buildings, worse parks, worse libraries. These are all answers that you could use. Okay, so let's just review the main idea. So you also have this slide on your main idea page. So, first, American slavery. The U.S. had millions of slaves, which made the United States very wealthy, very rich. Slavery was awful. It was very bad. White violence. White communities specifically attacked successful black communities. Okay. The Civil War. The Civil War ended slavery, but the situation did not change much for black Americans after slavery was ended. Jim Crow South. This kept black people in worse conditions than white people and led to a large difference in wealth, so money, and opportunity. Civil rights movement managed to win better treatment for black people, but the leaders were killed. The leaders were killed. And then redlining. The process of redlining created large differences, again, in the wealth and opportunities for black communities that still exist today. And so the main idea I want you to get from this is that there's a long history of this situation, and it still has effects today. It still causes so many problems today, and we'll talk about some of them in the next lesson.